friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about the ways to develop a healthy relationship with counting calories. Counting calories can lead to a very obsessive relationship with food, which is very unhealthy. And I feel like once people start to understand the numbers behind the food that they're eating, they become very restrictive. And that's not good for a number of reasons. One of them being that you're not going to get your micronutrients that you need. Some people don't eat enough at all, which can lead to eating disorders. A lot of people that undereat tend to lack a lot of the micronutrients that are extremely important in an overall healthy body, but can also lead to a number of problems. I actually was reading an article about a kid who only ate, I think it was French fries, Pringles, and white bread or something like that, and he started to go blind. So there's a lot of reasons that you need to be eating not only enough, but also enough micronutrients. A lot of people preach the importance of intuitive eating, which I totally agree with, but if you don't really understand what intuitive eating is, it's gonna make no difference if you don't know what it is, or if you have a misconception of what it is. If you're not educated in nutrition, then intuitive eating can look like, hey, I'm craving pizza, so I'm gonna eat some pizza. And that's not what we're trying to do here. That's not the true meaning of intuitive eating. Back before I was, I guess, less health conscious, back when I was eating more processed and highly preserved food, I didn't notice that it made me feel as bad as it does now. Not like it makes me feel bad in my head, like it literally makes my body feel not good. I had a totally different reaction back then because that's what my body was used to eating. Your body is going to adapt to what it's consistently familiar with. Now that my diet consists mostly of as least processed foods as I can find, as more whole foods that contain as many micronutrients as I can find, my body has a completely different reaction to the kinds of foods that I was eating before that were highly processed and preserved and just, overall not that great for you. Like if I eat things with like white flour and like white bread and stuff like that, I bloat so painfully. My stomach literally feels like a rock, and I have taken notice in that. And I'm not exactly sure if that's because I don't feel like that as much. Like I don't know if I had the same reactions back then. I know it wasn't this intense for sure, but I probably still got bloated and still was in pain and everything. I probably just didn't notice because that's what I was used to feeling. You don't know how good your body can feel and how like concentrated you can actually be, how much easier it is to stay focused. Like you get rid of brain fog and you have a lot more energy when you eat more whole and less processed foods. So if you've been eating not so great for a majority of your life, then you're probably not gonna know what you should actually be feeding your body by just intuition. It is extremely important to try new foods and new diet regimes to educate yourself in order to find out what works for your body. There's never gonna be a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to food because everyone's genetic makeup is completely unique. I was actually listening to a podcast and this girl was saying how she was trying to eat more salmon because salmon is good for you, and pretty much just how it made her feel like garbage, and she felt like her body looked like bigger, it was holding more water, like she just felt chubby. And she was like, I don't understand, like salmon's supposed to be really good for you. She ended up taking a food sensitivity test and she found out that she reacted really highly and she was very sensitive to salmon. So despite all the research saying that salmon is great for you, probably is great for a majority of people, but not for her. And that's why it's important to constantly be trying new things, switching out new foods and switching up your routine to figure out what does work best for you. And when I say like new diet regimes, I don't mean like the South Beach diet and like liquid only diets and stuff like that. I mean like try like intermittent fasting, which is something I could totally go into in a whole nother video. But I don't mean restrictive diets. When I say diet, I mean just what you're eating. Anything that you're putting in you is your diet. So how do you start to keep data on yourself and count calories without becoming obsessive? I do have a few options or even phases. Like if your end goal is, say that you want to do a competition and you're trying to treat your body like a machine, like input, output, this is what I need to do to achieve this goal, then these are phases that I would use to adjust to that in a healthy way and not become restrictive and go crazy and develop eating disorders, because that's a real thing and it's scary how easily you can fall into it, especially when you're trying really hard to get into a healthy lifestyle. And I suggest at least a month on each of these phases because you're doing research on yourself. You're essentially conducting experiments on yourself to figure out what works for you. So let's just jump right into it. So phase 1, my most impactful tip is gonna be to eat as whole, unprocessed, nutrient-rich, or nutrient-dense foods that you possibly can, and try and cut out or at least lessen the highly processed and preserved, low nutrient dense foods that you can. So during this phase, you should be keeping a food journal, not to be confused with a food log. To me, a food log keeps data on the food, and a food journal keeps data on you and how the food makes you feel. So in this food journal, in this phase 1, you're not gonna write anything about the food you're eating, but rather how the food makes you feel. This will give you a really good foundation and understanding of how your body reacts to food. Things to note in this process are gonna be like how full the food leaves you and how long it leaves you full. Did it give you more energy, or did you find that you were more sleepy and sluggish afterwards? Did you become bloated or have any negative tummy reactions, like whether it's gas, bloating, a stomach ache, like whatever negative feelings associated with this food? And I'm not talking about guilt, I mean physical feelings. Did you have heartburn, and your bowel movements? Were they strained? Were they smooth? How often were you having bowel movements? And like, I know it's like kind of icky to talk about poo, but we all do it. And you're literally keeping data on yourself to understand yourself. So it's not weird. Just don't let anyone read it. I'm just kidding. What I was saying earlier about like the quantity of the food, really what only thing you're gonna write about the food is what exactly the food is, and more of like a vague guess of the quantity. Like however much you know yourself, you can say like, oh, I had a large amount of this, or I only had a little bit of this, or I had about this size of whatever food. Because portion size can also play a big role in how your body feels. Some food that makes you feel awesome when you eat it can also have the adverse effect if you eat too much of it. So say that you've completed this phase consistently for about a month, and you can see all the data, what foods made you feel good, what foods made you feel bad, what foods made you feel great, what if you had too much of it, made you feel bad. That'll give you a really good understanding of, like I said, how your body reacts to certain foods. And so once you've gained adequate knowledge of what your body does and doesn't agree with, you can move on to phase 2. Phase 2 focuses a little bit more on measuring your food quantity. It's super important in this phase to not work towards any specific goal, such as weight loss, because this is where the obsession can start creeping in. The only goal that you're working towards in this phase is eating food that agrees with you and makes you feel good, and measuring the quantity of the food. In this phase, it would be helpful to use a kitchen scale, a food scale, so that you can get an accurate reading of the quantity of the food. And I would definitely suggest to keep journaling how the food makes you feel. And when I say food, I mean anything that you consume. You could be like, oh, well, I drink this coffee, but I'm not gonna write it down because it's not food. Like, no, you need to write anything and everything that you consume. Don't go crazy with it. Like I said, that's how obsession creeps in, but as much as you can remember to, try and track pretty much everything that you're eating if you can. Like I said, don't go overboard. It's really easy to slip into obsessiveness. So like I said, I would definitely suggest still writing how it makes you feel, but your main goal is to measure the quantity of the food as accurately as you can, because this is gonna familiarize yourself with what your portion sizes look like. You'll see people that have been working out and being conscious of what they're eating for a while. You'll see that they don't have to measure stuff. They'll be preparing food and they're like, I know this is this many ounces. I know this is this many ounces. And it's because they've done it for so long that they know what it looks like. And that's where the intuitive part of eating starts to come into play. And you'll start to understand what your body's food portion preference size looks like. I would also write the time that you're eating food as well, because your body may react to things differently in the morning than it does at nighttime. Like I said, everyone's genetic makeup is totally different. There's so many variables in how our body reacts to things. But your journal is gonna look something like, this time I ate X amount of this food, but ideally followed by a brief summary of how it made you feel. But you should already have an idea of how it's gonna make you feel. But it's just always good to keep track of yourself. Like, any data that you can keep on yourself is really good. That's how you grow as a person. After you feel like you've spent an adequate amount of time in phase 2, you can move on to phase 3. Phase 3 is the final data phase and also the most numerical of all the phases. In this phase, you'll have the ability to start relating calories to the quantities and to the foods. I would definitely suggest to go back in your journal to phase 2, where you did write the exact quantities and types of food, and go ahead and can figure out how many calories were in each, because that's gonna give you a quick rundown of how many calories you were eating a day per se, how many, say, for breakfast or lunch or dinner, however you're curating your journal. You can find the calories of whatever you need to by simply Googling it. I've done that before, and you can find a lot of very general knowledge literally just by, if you type it in on Google and the first thing that comes up will be the answer that Google found was the most responsive. You can also find an app to help you track it. I've used MyFitnessPal before, and it has a lot of more specific options for you to use, which I find really helpful. It's all up to you with how specific you want to be. In each phase, obviously, the more specific you're going to be, the more accurate reading you're going to get, but it's all about what works for you and what's gonna keep you from being obsessive and restrictive. With the combined data of the portion plus how it made you feel, you'll now have a good idea of, okay, this many calories of this specific food made me feel like this. And ideally, the question that you're looking to answer is, what makes me feel my best? This phase 3 allows you to understand your energy consumption so that you can add that data together with your energy exertion to let you know precisely what your numbers equal out to in the end. This will be able to give you the freedom to say, hey, I've eaten this today, so I have this much allowance left. This can be a very positive thing in the sense that you can say, hey, I'm gonna eat this and this and this so that I can have chocolate cake later. Because y'all know how I feel about chocolate cake. If you don't, I love it. This is super useful in terms of physique manipulation for when you may be working towards a specific goal, like I was saying earlier, whether that be like a bulking phase, which means that you want to put on muscle, or a cutting phase, which means that you want to lose fat. Sometimes the cutting phase, depending on how harsh, makes you lose muscle too. Remember that. So your journal is gonna look like, ideally you're still gonna be writing about how the food makes you feel, in addition to how many calories are in the food, the quantity of the food. You could also, like I discussed earlier, you could also write what time of day you're eating the food. It would also be helpful in this phase to jot down your mental state, because like I said, this is the most numerical stage. This is the stage where you're putting calories to the food, and food may start to look like numbers to you instead of fuel. And it's really important to keep track of your mental state and how you're feeling mentally as well when you're eating. This is a really good stage to implement that, because that'll give you a stronger hold on being able to look back and say like, oh, okay, I think I'm starting to slip here. My mental health isn't doing too great, or the latter, which would be awesome. And like, hey, you know, I'm feeling so good about myself right now. I have such a good understanding of my body and what agrees with it and what doesn't. But once you've developed a good relationship and a good understanding with phase 3, you can move on to phase 4, which is intuitive eating. Congrats, you've made it to intuitive eating now. Typically by this time, you'll no longer need to track things that you're consuming, as you ideally would have the knowledge that you need to know how to take care of your body, which includes foods that agree or disagree with your body, what time of the day is the best time to eat for you, what portion size fits you best, as well as what the portion size looks like, and how many calories are typically in that. This is gonna be the most sustainable and mentally healthy phase overall. And it is really important to understand that our bodies do change over time due to factors such as age and many other natural and sometimes unnatural occurring factors, and thus will react to foods differently than it did in the past. Just like the same way that when you're a kid and you have all this energy and you could run around for days, then you get older and all you wanna do is sleep. And you just get tired more easily, like that kind of thing. It's totally natural. Your body is constantly changing, constantly evolving. So it is important to take a step every now and then and review how your body's doing. So I totally suggest going back through the phases, mostly 1 and 2, to see how your body is doing and be able to keep up with yourself as you grow. That's really it. There is no phase 5. That is my guide on how to start a healthy relationship with food, how to start a healthy relationship with counting calories, and how to start intuitive eating. I really hope that the information / advice in this video was helpful. If you did find this helpful, if you did like it, please like and subscribe. share with a friend, leave me a comment, some feedback down below. Let me know what you want to know about, any topics, any questions that you have. I would love to hear from you so I could answer them. And remember, if you can only be one thing today, be kind, especially to yourself. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.